السلام عليكم. نبدأ الآن مع المهندس لؤي غزالة، مستشار وكيل المشروعات الكبرى ومشروعات الشراكة بوزارة الأشغال بدولة البحرين. موضوع عن البنود التي يجري التفاوض عليها بشكل كبير في عقود الشراكة بين القطاعين العام والخاص. فليتفضل مشكورا.
Hello. Our topic today is interesting, but at the same time it is argumentative. Many people disagree, or many people, they have different viewpoints on these contractual clauses. There are many solutions to these clauses, as we will see in the presentation. We will wait. Okay, so we start our presentation. Heavily negotiated clauses in public-private partnership contract. These are the clauses that are usually takes time to finalize. Force majeure clause, material adverse government action, change in law. There's a minor difference between material adverse government change and change in law. Termination benefits, this is critical. Refinancing, this is emerging topic. Lenders step-in rights, we will elaborate slightly into this. Confidentiality and transparency, and finally dispute resolution. As intro, there has been many attempts to standardize the public-private partnership contracts. The task is difficult, maybe unrealistic, due to the different types and the different financing structures and the different legal jurisdictions. The notable attempt was made by Her Majesty the Queen PF2. This is a 400-page document. They tried, the Treasury Department in the UK, to standardize the public-private partnership. Usually, many contracts in public-private partnership, they take extracts from this Treasury 400-page document. So this is a good reference if you're drafting a public-private partnership contract. Force majeure is simple. It is something that is not the responsibility of both parties, the contracting or the private sector. And no one can be held responsible for that event. And as a consequence, the financial implications needs to be shared. Usually, force majeure is detailed in the contract, and items are specified. The topic has been heavily researched. There is not much disagreement on what constitutes a force majeure. The treatment sometimes is difficult because the implications are huge, but force majeure, nobody is responsible for its occurrence. The consequences of the force majeure should not be allocated to any one party. The financial implications should be dealt with fairly and maybe evenly. Material adverse government action is different from change in law. This action is specific to the project. When the government does something that adversely affects the project, that action can be temporarily or extended or permanent. Material adverse government action is a ground for termination by the consortium if it continues like 6 to 12 months, the private entity can use this government action as grounds to request termination of the contract. So it's very critical that the government considers the consequences of these actions. Change in law is something that is not specific to the project. It is something that the government wants to do, and it just happens that the project is affected. Change in law can have a positive effect on the consortium. In other words, a change in law can make the consortium make more money, or it can make them lose more money. But change in law is something not specific to the project, but the private entity is being affected either positively or negatively by this change in law. Usually there is negotiations to mitigate the effect of the change in law. Termination benefits or termination payments are critical. If the government sometimes can make material adverse change that lasts a long time, they can choose to terminate the project. They can default on payments to the private entity. These are grounds for termination. The private entity will seek his termination payments. The government will pay substantially if it terminates the project. They have to pay the cost of financing. They have to pay everything as if the project was not terminated. I've listed a few items, like the expected returns they have to pay. Compensation for redundancy, this has to be offset. Cost payable as a result, everything has to be paid to the private entity as if the project is not terminated. Termination causes can be default of the contracting party or the public entity. It can be prolonged material adverse government change. It can be change in law. It can be force majeure sometimes. There are many reasons why a project can be terminated, and the private entity is fully compensated. Refinancing is an emerging topic. Many projects they either have technology risk, or they have demand risk, or they have something, or for example, regulation risks. And these projects are usually financed at a higher cost. The private entity does not think that these conditions will continue for a long time. So what they will do, they will seek short-term financing until the project is commissioned. They will seek like 4 to 5, 6 years financing until the project is commissioned, and then the project becomes operational and the regulation environment is cleared. Technology is stabilized. After those 4 or 5 years, he can seek refinancing. Refinancing, he can secure financing at a substantially lower rate. So this is commonly done with high-risk projects that are not expected to continue to be high risk throughout the duration of the project. They secure like construction financing, and once the project is commissioned, things are stable, they can seek refinancing. Refinancing will result in gains for the private sector and for the private entity, for the public entity. So financing gains needs to be shared. For example, when they start the project, they borrow the money at, let's say, 4%. Refinancing is done at 2%, so there's a gain of 2% in financing cost over 20, 30 years, which can be substantial. these gains are shared between the private sector and the public entity. So refinancing is done to take advantage of the changing landscape in the financial markets. Lenders' step-in rights. These are very critical. Banks, they want to have the authority to intervene in the project. If the project for one reason does not perform, the public entity wants to terminate the contract, lenders will come in and ask for a time to fix things. It is not in the banks, they don't know what to do with the asset if the project is terminated. Banks are not into the business of selling assets. We've seen this in real estate. Many banks, they don't want to take flats that they finance because they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to sell it. Same thing applies with these projects are huge and they have no use other than the intended use of that project. So it's in the best interest of the banks to make things work. Step-in rights are designed to make these projects work. They ask for a stay period. They try to replace the operational company. If they cannot replace it, they get another operational company to co-assist. At the end of the day, they are focused on making things work. So step-in rights by the lending institutions are very critical in these projects. Confidentiality also is picking up as a key item in these contracts that are subject to negotiations because the public in many countries, they want information. And the private sector simply does not want to release these informations, or they think of it more of an administrative burden. So confidentiality, releasing information, releasing cost structure is something that is usually resisted by the private sector simply because he does not want the competition to learn how his cost structure, how much money he is making, but at the same time, the public, they demand disclosure. Also, the public entity, they need to monitor this project. They can monitoring by various KPIs that are connected to the cost and level of service. So disclosure is something that the public entities demand, the private sector resists. At the end, there has to be a formula that can provide the minimum information that is sufficient for both sides. Dispute resolution, my colleague Najib spoke extensively about this. Dispute resolution is critical in these contracts. They need to specify which place to do the arbitration. They need to specify if the arbitration is binding or not binding. They need to specify the international standards. A waiver of immunities is critical. A waiver of sovereign immunity is critical in these contracts. And no private sector will come and sign a contract with an entity that claims sovereign immunity. So waiver of sovereign immunity is very critical in public-private partnerships. The purpose of arbitration, whether it's mediation or dispute resolution, is to reduce time. And then you can separate arbitrated item between technical issues that can be resolved over a relatively short period of time and financial issues that involves fee renegotiations, which takes longer time. The objective of arbitration is to streamline the project while allowing the service to continue at the same time. This is the conclusion of the presentation. If you have any question on any of these, I'll be more than happy to answer you. Yes, Mr. Naif.
شكرا مهندس لؤي. Regarding, it was about like the termination payments.
Yes.
I have two questions actually. Termination payments. If you go back to it. Yes, the last, no, back please.
Yes.
The last sentence which you have read is something that I would like to shed light on. In case the PPP contract is terminated on the grounds of default of the private partner, the lenders should still be compensated at least to some degree. And you have places arguable.
Yes.
We have come to a position in previous years regarding about like how much of compensation the lenders should be receiving based on like their trust and the confidence they have placed in their choice to finance the strategic investor, to the extent that he would default, he would, I would say, halt the operations of a public utility, and they would still get 100% of their full money. The thing is about it, because see, we have introduced a kind of policy, and it has been withdrawn recently because of, like I would say, the resistance from the lenders regarding this. But the problem is, a lot of them, they don't understand that the halting and I would say the halting of operations of a public utility is a loss for the state as well. And that's why this policy, I believe in some other countries, is still practiced. And the state enforces it just to place some extent of due diligence that has to be taken into account by the lender to choose the best partner to be the sponsor for this project. And I don't know, like, if this is the case maybe in Bahrain or not, but in Kuwait it has been withdrawn, for this one. What do you think?
This is why I wrote arguable, because usually senior lenders, they have entitlements. It has to be, this is why it is always the last resort for lenders to terminate the project, especially if they select an operator who is incapable. But sometimes they don't have a say in selecting the operator. The operator is selected by the public entity, and then there is the financial closure. The operator goes to the banking institution, presents all documents. So if the public entity is being, let's say, deceived by the operator credentials, banking institutions are in the same shoes. So this is where the argument comes from. And both sides have been entangled, let's say, with a bad operator. That this is why it has to be subject to some sort of negotiations, really. Termination right is different. Termination right, it's the public entity willingly decided to terminate. It is nobody's fault. Somehow they decided to terminate. I am with the opinion that the private entity should not be entitled for all their profits as if the project was not terminated. Many will argue that with termination payments, we should get all our profits as if the project is not terminated. I don't support that view. I support that there has to be some sort of reduced profits, because you never know if the project will succeed, will continue its success in the future. And there is inherent assumption, if you get all your profit, the project will continue to be successful. And this is just an assumption. So you're correct in this aspect. There has to be some sort of reduction on the expected profits by the private sector.
I want to comment on the same point.
Okay.
Now, to what extent does the government entity bears responsibility for letting the project go into default before announcing the termination of the contract? If the government entity is a partner, they should be in line with whatever's going on in the project. So part of the default or part of the the disruption of the project might be from the government's entity not noticing where this project is heading. Hence, when the bankers come and say, well, we lended it and we trusted the government as a partner, they should have at least raised the flag at some point before they allow the project to go into complete disorder. So do the government entities, are they somehow liable for the default of the project in front of the lenders?
I'm not sure I understand your question exactly, but I'm assuming that the government should give a notice period to the private sector before termination. Is that?
No, I mean, if there is a point at the project where the government entity wants to terminate the contract, okay, due to a certain default, okay? And then, of course, as you just said, arguably the lenders don't have the right to ask for any compensation for their monies because of the termination. But how liable is the government entity in the time period until they notice that there's a default? Because I'm sure there are signs that should be raised before the project reaches that level of disturbance. I mean, the government entity should at least have some sort of milestones, some sort of red flags to notice such big default that leads to complete disruption of the project and termination.
Okay, I get the question. The answer is twofold. Usually governments go for termination for political pressure, for public opinion, for adverse public opinion of the project. For example, the public decided that this service should be provided by the government and not by the private sector. There is public pressure, the government moves to termination. The performance component, usually there are red flags. The government will start showing dissatisfaction with the service. They will start issuing notices. They will notify the lenders. The lenders will come in. They will try to offer solution like bringing a co-obligor, another operational company, to assess the existing. They will try to work out a deal to remove the operator and bringing another operator. But these are two different tracks. Performance, termination is one thing, and then the government deciding they don't want the project, either for political pressure or the need for the project has ended. There are two tracks, but usually divorce is the worst cure in these projects. They are costly, and the legal fees are substantial in this. Hopefully, the public entity does not go and close a contract without being 100% sure that this is what they want. I hope you're not terminating any projects in Kuwait. This is really worst cure.
I have a question regarding the confidentiality and transparency.
Yes.
Now, when we talk about confidentiality, we talk about like within the contracts or the application of the project. I have issues in dealing with PPP projects. For example, it's not even, I believe it's mostly common, maybe in the region and somewhat. Regarding the confidentiality of the TOR of the RFP, for example, we have seen this. Some of the bidders, they would go and disclose information, I would say, that doesn't serve their purpose. Maybe some kind of, I would say, clauses that they would like to contest. And they would go and provide to some publications to effectively and negatively impact the project as a way to push on the public entity to step back and withdraw these. Have you dealt with this kind of procedure before? Because I know there are terms that we place on confidentiality during the tendering, where we, in case of breach of confidentiality of the document and what comes in it, that you could liquidate the bid bond. And this is something that we have faced, but I don't know if some of the issues may be happening in Bahrain or not the same case, where like disclosure of such content in a way by the bidder to negatively impact the requirements and the conditions and clauses stated by the public entity.
We have issues in the parliament in Bahrain wanting more disclosures than the public entity is willing to provide. Usually in RFPs, we try to give the minimum needed to price the project, because we don't want to reveal too much. For example, when we try to do a sewage treatment plant, we know our cost in treating the water. All bidders, they entered into the bids, they asked, what is your cost as a government? Of course, we cannot release this because this is like critical element for them to build their price on. But at the same time, they are unaware of the local conditions. So this is, once bids are all in, you try to rationalize if you need to provide additional information so that they can tailor their project to suit the local market. Because when they price, it's done for the first time. So there's, and even when the government provides the data is not really 100% actual, because it's based on assumptions, and with government accounting, you never know about the cost, because there are always variations, there are always change orders that are not added to your cost. So even when the government provides the cost or similar information, the information is not that accurate. So this is something that has to be balanced. At the end of the day, you want your prices to be competitive. The way for the price to be competitive is by revealing as much information as you can, so that these people can price the risk reasonably. For example, when we do roads project, we provide them with geotechnical data so that they are able to price the construction cost correctly. Many people in the government, they argue, no, we don't provide this data, let them do their own. This, let them do their own, it can be costly sometimes, because nobody would want to invest so much money just to give a price. So the more information you give as a government entity, but at the same time you don't want to give too much critical information that will make them aware of your threshold, or what you will accept or what you will not accept. You want still want the process to be competitive, but at the same time you want to steer it in such a way that you don't end up rebidding for the project. I don't know if I answered your question. It's an art, really. It's an art. Confidentiality is an art. You want to give just enough for them to be competitive.
في أي سؤال؟
You can always write to me. I mean, my email is, I think it will be circulated, this presentation. My email is at the last slide. You can always write. Usually within 2 days, I can get back to you. Thank you.